Hi and welcome to The Courageous Collective, the podcast where we celebrate diverse women who dare to do things differently. I'm Rupa Baradva, a copywriter and communication specialist. I work with women entrepreneurs to help them get clear on their brand messaging, and I help them become more visible to their target customers using PR.
And I'm Vardeep Edwards, founder of The Branding Fox, a design consultancy that supports women in business with their branding and design needs. After working in corporate roles, we both took the leap into self-employment and created our own businesses where our skills and experience could really shine. But something we both noticed was the lack of women that looked like us at events, on speaker panels, and in the media.
Which is why we created the Courageous Collective podcast. This is our platform to celebrate and champion diverse women who are smashing it in their businesses. In each episode, we speak to a female founder about the story behind their business. We explore their inspirations, the challenges they faced and how they've dealt with them. And we talk about what they're yet to achieve.
Welcome to the Courageous Collective and enjoy today's episode.
Hi, Rupa and Vardeep here with another episode of the Courageous Collective. As always, we're thrilled that you're listening to our podcast, so thank you. Now, can we ask you to do one small thing before we get started? It takes less than 10 seconds to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Once you finish listening, please give us a rating and leave a comment too. It really does help us secure great guests and keeps our podcast going. Thank you. On to today's episode, we're talking about something that has been mentioned a lot on our podcast. It's a topic that gets a lot of airtime: imposter syndrome. What exactly is it? Do we all get it? And is it possible to overcome imposter syndrome? Vardeep, what does imposter syndrome mean to you?
So before I started researching, reading more around this topic for today's episode, my original understanding of what it meant was feeling like a fraud or feeling like you're about to get found out. So that sort of leads on to maybe you don't know quite what you're doing and a bit of an underlying fear of not being and feeling good enough. What about you, Rupa?
Yeah, very similar actually. I think definitely can agree with feeling like you're not enough and feeling like a fraud. You're kind of in these spaces, whether it's in your career or, through your business, you're kind of wondering, how did you get here? And actually, should you be here? It's almost like, do you belong here? I think the one thing that I've found personally when I've kind of gone through those moments of feeling like an imposter or a fraud is that it can quite easily become like a never-ending spiral, and you kind of, you have to kind of work yourself out of that thought process because it can quite quickly spiral out of control.
So why do you think it's such an important topic to talk about?
I think from doing some reading, obviously, we've had some great guests on our podcast who've also talked about imposter syndrome, women who have founded successful businesses, and they've kind of talked about their experience of imposter syndrome. I think there is some comfort in the fact that it does happen to everyone. It might not get talked about enough, but I think it is reassuring to know that we all have that nagging little voice of doubt in our heads. And I think it's important that we talk about these topics because, as we've said so many times before on this podcast, the more that we talk about these things, the more we normalize them. And therefore, they're kind of out there in the open. And also, it's about reassuring each other that you're not alone in feeling like this. And actually, there may be days, weeks, months where you don't feel that you're a fraud or that, you don't belong or that you're not kind of the thing that you set out to be. But actually, there will be other times when you do feel like that. So I think normalizing it, having these conversations, sharing our stories, it does help and inspire other people. And in doing that, it also then fosters a sense of community. It helps us feel like we belong. So I think it's a good thing to talk about this. And yeah, I think owning it a little bit more as well and saying, actually, I do feel like that. I think that is helpful. What about you? Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I believe it's more common than we realise. I think it's easy to think you're the only ones going through something, especially as a sole business owner. And, you're having to deal with these feelings and thoughts that come up while you're working from home by yourself. But I think the reality of it is that others will be going through it as well and will have experienced it in some form or another. And yeah, absolutely. The way to normalize it is to talk about it and bring it out into the open, to know that you're not alone, to know that other people will understand that you're going through this as well, but also to understand what it is and, and have that support as well around you.
Yeah, agree. And I think also we're going to come on to this later, but also then the strategies for dealing with it, because I guess they're also very important in terms of sharing it, but also, being aware of the different ways that you can kind of overcome imposter syndrome as well. So let's talk about confidence, because I think when we talk about confidence, when we talk about imposter syndrome, we also talk about confidence. They are interlinked. And why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was reading about it, I think I'd always saw them as two separate topics, but actually imposter syndrome is entwined with your sense of your own self-confidence and self-worth and self-doubt. So, and I think the thing is with a lot of these issues is they do kind of overlap. But, when I was thinking about what it means for me in terms of imposter syndrome, and it's this feeling of uneasiness about it, and what sometimes that feeling can do is it brings in that self-doubt, which is then linked to your sense of confidence. And that might be in general, it might be in your abilities, or it might be in certain situations, it might be work, it might be personal. And I think it can happen in sorts of different instances. It can happen to people who are successful or seem to be successful. It can happen to anybody at any level or age and stage of where they are at with their business. But if you think about, for me, if it's that feeling of not feeling good enough or not right for this particular situation, then yes, that can have an impact on your level of confidence because of it. What about you, Rupa? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a yes from me. I think they are interlinked, and I think often when you have a lack of confidence, that's often when imposter syndrome can strike. It's that moment where you're kind of having those doubts already, and I think it kind of then takes hold and it kind of becomes obviously that much greater. I found this study, which I thought was really interesting. So it was a study of 4,000 adults, and they answered lots of questions about confidence and imposter syndrome. And this stat really shocked me. 62% of women admitted that through their lives, they've never experienced true confidence, which I thought was quite a big number. Yeah. The fact that they've never experienced true confidence really just made me sit up and kind of think, wow, that's quite a big number. And then the other stat that I just wanted to pull out was that 63% of women believed that a lack of confidence initially contributed to feeling like an imposter. So I think those two concepts are definitely linked. I think that, I was shocked, and it is actually quite sad, actually, that people haven't experienced true confidence. I mean, that's something that, I really hope that we can get better at feeling and doing, because I think being more confident can help you, do different things, experience different things. But it's really difficult from talking from experience of not having confidence and actually thinking, oh my God, all avenues are close to me and I'm not really sure what's kind of next and what I should be focusing on. And it's, as I said before, it's a bit like a spiral effect. And I think be able to develop and pursue different things, I think you have to have those strategies that will help you kind of, almost stop that nagging voice. And I know we've had a few guests on the podcast. So I remember Sophia, who's the founder of Fine Tuned, style, she would always say, just stop that nagging voice, don't even let it kind of get going, because sometimes it's, once you're playing that record in your head, that track is kind of telling you that you don't have the confidence, that you're not worthy of whatever. Once it takes hold, then that's it. It's really difficult to then come back from that. So I think it's definitely imposter syndrome is definitely linked quite strongly with confidence.
Yeah, it's an amazing high amount of women who have said that in their study about not experiencing true confidence. I do wonder, do you think imposter syndrome affects certain groups more than others? We're obviously focused on women and women of colour in this podcast, and you've highlighted that stat about women. I don't know, what are your thoughts around that?
I mean, talking from personal experience, I feel like, yes, the women that I know and have spoken to have mainly been women of colour. And we have talked about moments of having that self-doubt and actually being in those situations where you just don't feel like you belong. Having said that, I don't think it is an issue or, something that is only experienced by women of colour. I think it's actually women in general, and also people from marginalised groups that actually can, experience imposter syndrome. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. Obviously, the lack of role models being one, not seeing people like you doing the things that you want to do, maybe being in the industries that you want to work in, or you maybe want to try something new. I guess that's why we set up this podcast in the first instance, to give people that place to come and actually see and hear and experience women of colour who are building their businesses. But I'll be honest, if we weren't doing this, would I see more women like us? I don't know. I think it's changing, but it's taking a really long time. So I think lack of role models is definitely maybe one reason why women of colour may feel imposter syndrome. I think my experience in the workplace has been that sometimes where I've maybe been put in a position or I've taken on a project, there sometimes has been moments where I've questioned why I've been given that responsibility. And I know the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion is so much more greater today. But when I was starting in my career, I definitely felt like sometimes I was given positions or projects because of maybe a quota to fill. And that in itself can also, leave a seed of self-doubt. Is it because of your ability, or is it because of your background, ethnicity? There's lots of, there's so many questions there to kind of dig into. But I think, and there's lots of rights and wrongs for quotas as well. But I think having that insight and kind of understanding as well of, these things can also negatively impact us as well as positively impact us. And it can impact us in terms of our professional and also personal image as well, in terms of how we feel about ourselves. Self-doubt can also go a long way to kind of damage that as well. I also wanted to just pull out a stat that I read. So NatWest did some research 2023, and they spoke to women who weren't necessarily business founders. In fact, most of them weren't. And 60% of the women that they spoke to said that they wanted to start their own business, but haven't due to feeling a lack of confidence. Now that stat was, again, it's pretty high, but it really spoke to me because I was probably one of those people. Maybe, just over 12 months ago, I was kind of in a career working in a corporate, had always dreamt of working for myself, but my lack of confidence definitely held me back. I felt like I couldn't make that next step. I attempted to several times, and I kind of almost set myself up for failure because I didn't necessarily work on the mindset and confidence challenges that I was facing. So I wanted to share that stat because I felt that one was really important. And then just a final note on this question, I do feel that whilst imposter syndrome and women particularly are talked about a lot, I think that imposter syndrome can impact anyone, men and women. But from the research and things that I read, men, interestingly, they manage to kind of push through despite self-doubt. They don't necessarily let it hold them back, whether that's applying for jobs that might be out of their reach. Maybe it's taking a greater risk in their businesses or careers. I feel like, again, that's something that, we couldn't not mention. What about you? What's your view, Vardy?
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting subject to talk about. I think the more we talk about it, the more I realise how large it actually is and how it's potentially tied into other thoughts and ideas. Because the whole thing about whether, men are affected by it or not, of course, everybody is at some point in some shape or fashion. But I don't know whether women are more affected by it or not. But one of the quotes that really stood out to me in part of my research was from a lady called Emily Hugh, and I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation of her surname, but she said that we're more likely to experience imposter syndrome if we don't see many examples of people who look like us or share our background who are clearly succeeding in our field. And I suppose just linking it back to our own personal experiences, I know that growing up and starting my career in design, now branding, I didn't see anybody at all who looked like me doing the type of job or even in that industry. And this is a long time ago. So we're talking about just over 20 years. And at the time, I thought nothing of it. But I do wonder how much of an impact that's had on me subconsciously, because I never thought I could go for creative director roles, or seeing the creative directors in some of the design studios that I used to work for. None of them were women, let alone a woman of colour at all. And I do wonder how much of an impact that has on you and what that's saying to you without you realising or being aware of it. So I do think there's something in there. And potentially, going back to that sort of lack of confidence and whether it's more women, and 60% of women don't start their own businesses. Is there enough visibility and role models for those women to go ahead? And even, I do wonder, if there's anything in our backgrounds, in our cultures, the way we've been brought up. And I don't mean that on a personal level with our own parents, but, we are affected by our environments. And if that environment shows you that it can be done, then maybe there's more chance of you actually taking those steps. So yeah, I think there's something really interesting there to talk about. And I think if you don't see people like you, I wonder whether that brings up the thoughts in your head, whether you're aware of it or not, as to whether those roles or those positions or that lifestyle even, or those career choices are right for you. And there's a bit of a safety net, I think, sometimes when you see a lot of people who are like you and who are, maybe they're all in similar fields, then maybe you think that's the route you need to go, and to do something different that no one around you or nobody that you see is doing what you're doing could be seen as a rebel, could be seen as an outsider. So it could self-perpetuate more feelings of being an imposter. And, and that's hard sometimes to kind of go against that grain, because you question yourself more as to whether this is the right option for you, because no one else is doing it. Yeah. And you don't know, do you? So I think there's so much more there than we are able to cover in this episode, and also more than I realised as well. So yeah,
it's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? I think definitely. So let's talk about overcoming imposter syndrome. So is it possible, and what can we do?
So one of the things that I actually listened to was a very short podcast by Stephen Bartlett, 5 minutes. And he talks about that feeling of uncomfortableness. And that's how I kind of liken this imposter syndrome, this feeling of like, I'm not quite sure, I feel really uneasy. And he spoke about it's okay to feel like that, and it's normal. as well doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for the thing or do that thing. It's just a feeling. And actually, he spoke about that being potentially pushing outside of your comfort zone. So that's when you look at it like that, it's not actually a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a failure because you feel uncomfortable about it. It just means that it's something different, or you haven't done it before, or you don't know what to expect, and to recognize that it's just a feeling. And one of the things that came out of it for me is to be curious about it. Okay, so you've got this feeling and these thoughts. You don't have to jump to conclusions or certain judgments as to what those thoughts and feelings mean, but maybe there's a certain curiosity that we can bring around that to question why we're feeling that, rather than a natural assumption that it just means this, therefore I mustn't do this thing, or this must mean it's hard or it's not right for me, or whatever it might be. Is just get curious about it and question it. How about yourself?
I was going to say that's such a good way of thinking about it, actually, because, anything that takes you out of your comfort zone does feel uncomfortable. And it's that kind of squeaky bum feeling, isn't it? It's like you're really putting everything everything out there, but reframing it and thinking of it as actually a positive experience, regardless of whatever the result is. It's okay. It's just a feeling, like you said. I think that's a great way of thinking about it. I think some things that I would add, having a little bit of self-compassion and feeling the feeling and experiencing it. And, we've talked about this before, but not kind of dwelling in that moment or staying in that moment too long, because I think that's then the danger of the spiral starting and kind of things going south. I think, experience that feeling. I think it's a valid emotion. It's okay to feel uncomfortable or feel that you're not good enough, or it's actually a feeling, like you said, and move on. And things to help you move on, one thing which we probably all need to do more of is reflecting on our achievements and things that we have done throughout our lives, whether it's, through our business, through our careers, however you want to kind of define that period. Maybe have a folder on your desktop, or, screenshots and messages that lift you up and make you feel good, and actually, I don't know, speak to the people that make you feel good as well. Find that kind of close network of people who you can pick up the phone to and just have a 5-minute conversation. And actually at the end of it, you realize that thing that had kind of blown up in your head isn't actually that big. I think the other thing is raising people up. And what I mean by that is that it takes a lot to put yourself out there, particularly online. When you share things on social media, maybe you've shared something in a personal post, or, you've kind of dug deep and talked about something that might be close to you. I think it's really important to, raise people up and actually be that social butterfly on social, media, and comment and, say nice things about people. And actually sounds so silly, like saying it out loud, but just being kind and kind of sharing joy online can go such a long way as to making people feel maybe better about themselves. Look, we don't know half the things that people are going through. In fact, we know barely nothing about what people are going through, but I think we can all just be kinder when we're around each other. And then I think the final thing is, sharing your story with other women. And I think that goes a long way. If you feel comfortable, talking about things, talking about your personal experiences of feeling those negative feelings of self-doubt, you can, what have you done to kind of overcome that? And even if you don't want to do that, I think it's just reassuring that we all feel those things. So actually just doing that, whether it's in a kind of, one-to-one conversation, or kind of, broader than that, maybe on social media, but that will go such a long way as to helping not only yourself, but other people. And as we've said, role models are so important. And I think that doesn't mean that we all have to be role models either, but I think acknowledging and hearing these stories is helpful. And I think it does go a long way as to kind of helping us. So how can imposter syndrome impact you and your business negatively? What would you say your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, so I think if you feel like an imposter, you feel like a fraud, and you feel like you shouldn't be here or in this role or doing the thing you're doing, I think what it could impact then is perhaps applying for jobs, because you might look at a job description and go, yeah, great, but I'm not that person. Or so you're not recognizing your achievements or what your successes are, or the fact that you are potentially qualified to go for this. It might stop you from going for promotions as well if you're in the workplace, because of the same type of thoughts that you don't think you're good enough, or someone will find you out if you go for that promotion and realize that you're not actually as qualified as you think or other people say you are. So I think it would just potentially hold yourself back, and it's potentially going to hinder your growth as well as a business owner. And I think we touched on this a little bit earlier about staying inside your comfort zone. So I think potentially you can hinder your growth as well, because the only way we're going to grow is if we put ourselves forward or try the thing and see what happens and be uncomfortable about it, do the new thing. And I think, potentially it might keep you where you are if you don't put yourself forward for things that are potentially going to help you grow as well as a business owner as well. And it might also help doubt your skills and abilities in yourself. And I think as a business owner, you need to have confidence in yourself, because you need to be able to give that to your clients. They are also buying in your confidence in your own skills and abilities. So therefore, you need to match that with how you present yourself, as well as how you put yourself forward, and in terms of what you're doing as well. And I did write a couple of notes here, and I don't know if you came across this as well, but apparently there are 5 different types of imposters that I read about. There's the perfectionist, there's the expert, there's the natural genius, the soloist, and the super person. The perfectionist is the person who wants to get everything absolutely right to be able to then go, yes, I am this person and I can do this thing. We've got the expert who wants to do all the training and get all the knowledge. I've got to read all the books first, and then they can see themselves as this successful person. You've got the natural genius who feels that they've got to do things naturally to be able to see themselves as a success. Therefore, if it doesn't come to them naturally, there's potential there for self-doubt. You've got the soloist, is the person who has to do everything themselves, so they don't reach out or ask for help. Therefore, if they've worked as part of a team or as part of a project, for example, and collaborated, they don't see that success in themselves because they haven't done it all themselves. And you've got the super person who has got to be the top of their game in everything they do, in every aspect in their lives, which I thought was really interesting. And I don't know about you, but I can definitely relate to perhaps the soloist, expert, and a bit of the perfectionist, I think, as well. And I think, I think it's really important to kind of recognize those traits in ourselves, because I can also see that in some other people I know, and just kind of help normalize this conversation, which is what this episode is about. But yeah, what about you, Rupa?
Yeah, I mean, all of that, I'm just nodding away because I agree with everything you said. I mean, let's start with the applying for jobs and going for promotions. I'm sure you came across this, but there's research that's out there which says that women very rarely apply for jobs unless they can check all their boxes, unlike men. And I mean, that's just, yeah, it's a real big one, because we all know that person that is so capable of doing certain things, but something holds them back, and often it's that nagging self-doubt. And I mean, that example just kind of shows that off to a T, really. I love those 5 examples as well that you shared of being an imposter. The perfectionist, expert, natural genius, and soloist, super person. And yeah, I think, at varying degrees, I've kind of felt all of those 5, types throughout my life, really. I think the perfectionist one, massively, I want to do things of a great standard. I don't want to just do things subpar, because that has been ingrained in me from kind of being very young, kind of doing my best, putting my best foot forward. However, in the world that we live in, sometimes imperfect action is actually what you need to take, because as we said before, experimenting and getting yourself out of your comfort zone, you kind of have to get on with things and take action. And I think imposter syndrome, sadly, does stop you from doing anything, which can also be more damaging than kind of not doing anything, particularly when you're a business founder. And I think that sense of paralysis, and I've felt this a lot, particularly in recent years, where I wanted to do something, wanted to own my own business, but I was kind of stuck and I didn't really know how. And I think I actually did end up having to invest in myself. I got a coach. I needed that kind of external perspective, because I wasn't able to answer all those questions myself. And I think that's a really good strategy for helping you sometimes when you can't see the way out, when you can't kind of see how you're going to overcome hurdles. Actually investing in yourself, investing that time and commitment, maybe having a third party to kind of help you, I guess, gather your thoughts. And sometimes you need to kind of go to that root cause of what that issue is. So I think that paralysis feeling is definitely something I've personally felt. And I guess the final point for me is that it's so easy to stay within your comfort zone. I mean, I definitely did that within my career for quite a long time, because it felt okay and I felt safe. And, as you mentioned above, sometimes because you don't see those role models, you feel that it's safer to almost stay where you are and almost be unhappy and kind of be in that situation where you're not necessarily loving or thriving off the work that you're doing, but you're okay kind of thing. And that again can lead to then paralysis and more self-doubt. So it's kind of that kind of self-perpetuating thing all the time. So let's go back to being perfect, or that kind of sense of perfection. It's one of those contributing factors to feeling imposter syndrome. How do you think we can stop that from happening?
So I just want to reiterate that our podcast is about the courageous collective. And I do think that this topic is really key for what we're about. So it's not necessarily being so out there and bold, but it is taking that first step and just being that bit braver and that bit more courageous. So therefore, to be able to do that, I think we have to lose our sense of being perfect. And what you talk about is taking that imperfect action, because I think that perfectionism is what stops us from taking that next step. And there's no such thing as perfect, because businesses are ever evolving. We're ever evolving as humans. The world is always changing. So there's no perfect moment. There's no perfect situation. There's no perfect lifestyle or character or situation to be in. And I think it's just reminding yourself that we are only human, and there's no idea of this perfect life or situation. So I think it's overcoming what that means to be able to take that next step as well. And it's just questioning where that idea comes from as well. What are we actually thinking is perfect, and where has that picture or the idea come from? And actually, once you start questioning that, how true is it? And actually, is that what you want? Is that the perfect ideal? And maybe the perfect situation for you is just what's right for how you want to feel at this moment in time, and not actually attached to the things or the material things. And I think living in an online world and the social media does perpetuate these feelings, because imposter syndrome might hold you back because you think you're not as good as that person, or you're not doing what that person is that you're seeing online, or they've got it sorted and you haven't. So it's really reminding yourselves that, one, we don't need to compare ourselves. And I realise that's easier said than done, because we all do. And it's just understanding that what we see of other people online, particularly on social media, is not the reality. And know that we're all in the same boat. So, you know, having these discussions and bringing it up for topics and talking about it certainly makes me realize that I'm not alone. And I think that's just having that understanding and reminding ourselves of that as well. And what are your thoughts, Rupa?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think first and foremost, it's exhausting. I think being perfect all the time it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's impossible for a start. But really, you are just taking from yourself. Really, you're not helping yourself, and I think it's again a really easy trap to fall into, as you just said. You know, being in this online world with Instagram and TikTok, and you know, we're getting glimpses into people's lives, and we're making assumptions about people's lives as well. And it's very easy to think that others have this picture perfect life. Highly unlikely, I would say. I think what people choose to show on social media is maybe just the tip of the iceberg. We're not seeing their kind of whole lives. I also think if you're following accounts that make you feel that way, that you should be, you know, living a certain way, or I know for a fact that I followed certain people that made me just feel a certain way, and in itself actually created that self-doubt in my head. I unfollowed them, and that was actually really difficult to do, but I feel 10 times, 100 times better for doing it. And I think that's the thing to remember. We're in control of what we can see, of, you know, what we consume on social media, what we can consume kind of more broadly as well. And I think try and curate those places to be serving you that content that makes you feel confident, that makes you feel happy. You want to be that confident, bright, bubbly person. Well, then, you know, you should be fed that content and consuming that content that makes you feel that way. So I think that's really, really important. And I think that will stop those feelings of having to be perfect. We've said it before, it's impossible to be perfect or flawless all the time. And actually, in the types of, you know, work that we do, we know that the flaws are actually what make people human and interesting. And actually, we should be embracing those flaws. You know, it's all part of being human and helping us connect with each other, connect the dots between us and our clients and our dream clients. I think having flaws are a good thing. Let's kind of embrace that and celebrate the fact that things don't always go our way, because I bet for every kind of post I put out there where I've said something along the lines of, oh, I tried this and it didn't work, those are the posts that generally get more engagement, because actually lots of people agree they've been in similar situations. Maybe they're not the same situation, but they've tried something and it hasn't worked, and it's okay. So I think reframing how we see failure and flaws, mistakes, it's okay. We all do them. I think the other thing, and this is something that takes consistent work, is adopting a growth mindset. It's, you know, part of reframing our mistakes and our failures, but also I think we have to work consistently at that mindset and not comparing ourselves, as you said previously, to other people and thinking that what they have is more than what I should have. I think feeling that actually we live in an environment where actually sharing our ideas and sharing our stories, sharing our value, giving more than what we are receiving is actually a better way of living life, because, yeah, we have everything at our feet. We have lots to kind of be thankful for. And I think it's that kind of abundance theory that, you know, there's lots of work out there. There's lots that we can all kind of take from life and society. But I think we have to do that in a nice, joyful way, rather than kind of assuming that you deserve more than X, Y, and Z. And I think the final one, and it's probably a good one to kind of finish on, is just to celebrate the journey and not focus on that end perfect result. Because as we all know, businesses don't follow a linear journey. It's kind of, you know, up, down, and then like really, really high highs and really, really low lows. And that's okay. That's part of the journey. You've progressed so much more today than yesterday. So kind of, even just reframing how you kind of see things will help you do that. But also just celebrate like existing and actually being around and, being able to like see the sunshine and, small things might sound a bit trite, but I guess it's just, celebrating and just being and kind of having the opportunities that we have as well. So I think, there's lots we can do. And I think also the fact that this is all a learning process, we're learning as we go along. And I think that's all okay as well, because you may be kind of at day one of embracing your imperfections, and that's okay, as well as being, a couple of years in as well. And I think, again, sharing those stories and talking about it like we are on this podcast is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there, isn't there, to unpack. And I think it's a really important topic to talk about and help normalize and know that everybody goes through it. So, and everybody will go through it at different points and different situations and have different experiences about it. But yeah, it really is more common. That's one thing I'm probably going to take away. It's more common than I initially realized. But, well, that's it for this episode. I feel like we could carry on. Imposter syndrome can obviously affect us at different points in our lives. And we really hope that you've gained some new insights into how you can deal with these feelings. We have got some helpful resources that we will share in our show notes. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've got any strategies in dealing with imposter syndrome, maybe you don't believe in it, maybe you do, maybe you've got some books or resources that have helped you. We'd love to hear from you and what you found useful. Do let us know. You can follow us on Instagram at _courageous_collective. Please do share your feedback and give us a rating too. And we will see you again in a fortnight with a new episode. See you soon. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Courageous Collective is created by Rupa Baradva and Vardeep Edwards. We really appreciate your feedback, so please like, share and follow us. Please also subscribe to receive an alert for our next episode.
You can find out where to follow us on social media in the show notes. And if you'd like to be a future guest, please do get in touch. Thanks, and see you soon.